56K is going to equal 10.3 kilobits per second. Each station requires 10 bits per second. Okay, so 100 divided by 1,000. So 10 bits per second for each station, which is going to give us, of course, 1030 over 10, terrible math, or 10,000, which is going to give us 1030 stations. Yeah, this is the most we can do. Okay. A large population of Aloha users manages to generate 50 requests per second, including both originals and retransmissions. Time is slotted in units of 40 milliseconds with 25 slots per second. Okay, so the questions are, what is the chance of success on the first attempt? What is the probability of exactly K collisions and then a success? And then what is the expected number of transmission attempts needed? So this is just plug and chug into the equations. So with 25 slots per second, an average of 50 requests per second, this gives us that G is going to equal 2. Then use the Slog Aloha formulas in section 412, and you're going to get that. So when G equals 2, that's going to give a probability of e to the minus 2 for exactly K collisions and then success. Then you're going to have that this is going to equal 1 minus e to the g minus g times, which is the number of attempts, and then times e to the minus g, which is going to work out to be essentially 0.135 times 0.865 okay. 18 Ethernet frames must be at least 64 bytes long to ensure that the transmitter is still going in the event of a collision at the far end of the cable. Fast Ethernet has the same 64-byte minimum frame size, but can get the bits out 10 times faster. How is it possible to maintain the same minimum frame size? Because the maximum length of the cable is 10 times shorter. Uh, 21, name 2 networks that allow frames to be packed back to back. Why is this feature worth having? Well, 2 you might talk about are gigabit Ethernet 802.16. Of course, it's useful because any gap between the packets is going to be wasted bandwidth. It's not so bad here, but there was a technology years ago called ATM that had really tiny cells. They were 53 bytes. And that is, it's sort of like, I don't know, the old thing about the ratio of surface area to volume, right? As the volume gets smaller, the surface area becomes dominant, and things cool off really fast. If you had that situation, and you had 53 bytes here, then look what happens if you have a gap here that's 52 bytes wide between 2 packets. You're going to lose like a third of your bandwidth right off the bat. And at those kinds of megabit rates that ATM was going, that's significant right off the, immediately. Whereas, if you've got the same amount of space, but your packets are 1,500 bytes, it's minuscule. So, give two reasons why networks might use error correcting code instead of error detection and retransmission. One, of course, is the medium is really, really nasty, and you spend all your time retransmitting, so you want to do some error correction. And of course, the classic one is for deep space, where the round trip time is measured in, hours.
Or even days.
Or days.
Talk about Voyagers, yeah.
Yeah, or days even, yeah. So, let's come back to 38. I guess, 40. It's mentioned in section 483 that some bridges may not even be present in the spanning tree. Now find a scenario where a bridge may not be present in the spanning tree. Well, all bridges do participate in a spanning tree algorithm of computed path towards the route. However, some bridges may not be part of the spanning tree that is used to forward frames between stations. In particular, a bridge that does not have the station directly connected to any of its ports and is part of a loop is a candidate for not being in the spanning tree. Oh, heavens. Okay, 41. To make VLANs work, configuration tables are needed in the bridges. What if the VLANs use hubs rather than switches? These hubs need to be configured, tables, why or why not? No, hubs are just physical repeaters, so there's nothing to configure. Yeah?
I got a half point marked off for that, but that's what I said. I said they're just connected.
Okay, show it to me, I'll make a note.
Okay.
We'll let them know. Okay, 42, switch is in the legacy end domain. Did we do that? Yeah, I guess we did. And on the right is VLAN aware switch. Would it be possible to use a legacy switch there, and if so, how would it work, and if not, why not? It would work. Frames entering the core domain would all be legacy frames, so it would be up to the first core switch to tag them as VLANs. You could do this by using MAC addresses or IP addresses. Let's go back to 38.
The hub question, are hubs actually repeaters, or are they just mechanical electrical connections?
No, they are repeaters in the sense they re-amplify the
They do
signal.
re-amplify it.
Okay, but
They don't examine it.
although I wouldn't, now I said that, but do I actually believe there are some on the market that actually don't do anything? Maybe.
But they charge you for it.
I wouldn't be surprised, let's put it that way. But the whole idea of hubs was to, when you had a 1 kilometer or even a half kilometer limit on the cable, was just to be able to extend the length of the cable. So collisions and everything pass through. So let's go back to 38. This is a part of the lecture we didn't get to, and I'm really sorry about that. So 38 is considered the extended LAN connected using the bridges V1 and V2 in figure 4-41B. Suppose the hash tables in the two bridges are empty. List all the ports on the packet that will be forwarded. Okay, so what we have here is B1. B1 here is connected to B2. And it's connected to H1. And off of here, we have E and F. And here we have G and D. Okay, and these are 1, 2, 3. This is 4. This is 4. And we have A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so the tables are empty. Okay, so A sends a packet to C. So who's gonna see it? Well, the tables are empty, so he doesn't know anything, so everybody's gonna see this, right? The whole idea of an Ethernet is that every packet is passing every station to pull it out. It's just that now we have learning bridges, we can sort of optimize that. So so A is sending to C here, okay? But nobody knows anything. So B1, A to C. B1 is going to send this on ports 2, 3, and 4. Okay, but B1 now knows that A is on port 1.
Can we fill in the B1 and B2 tables, hash tables on the side while we're doing this exercise?
I'm sorry, dude?
While we're filling all this stuff out, logically, I can remember that A goes to 1, but can we just have the tables filled out on the side, or is that like, okay, never mind, okay, sorry.
It's bad enough as it is. Okay, E sends a packet to F. E is sending to F. Now, E and F are on this hub over here, so they're electrically connected, but nobody knows that. So B2, okay, so, let's see. B2 is going to send this on 1, 3, and 4, and B1 is going to forward it on 1, 2, and 3. Okay? Even though it just went through that electrical connection over there, nobody knew anything, so now everybody knows that E and F are, are somewhere out there. Or they know where that E is somewhere out there. And, okay, so F sends a packet to E, so he responds. B2 doesn't do a thing. B2 found out that this came from the hub, and that, E and F were on that hub, so he didn't have to do a thing. So B2, no. And so B1 never seen it. Okay. G sends a packet to E. G sends to E. G is down here. So B2 will forward this on port 2. B1 won't see anything. Just B2 knows where E is. D sends a packet to A. D sends to A. So B2 will forward this on 4. Okay, and B1 will forward it on 1. Because the first time we did this, we found out that A was on port 1 here, and B2 found out that A was coming from port 4. B sends a packet to F. So B1 will forward this on 1, 3, and 4. And
Why does it go out with 1?
because he doesn't know if there isn't anything else out
That's
there.
the question I was gonna ask you.
Right.
They don't know really they only know what.
They only
heard
know
from.
what is out there, they don't know what isn't out there.
Okay. It could
Right.
be like another bridge or something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, and B2 will forward this on 2. Okay? All right. Now, I apologize that we didn't cover this in class before you had to do the homework. For those of you who came in late, here's some homework to deal with. But I am going to go over them now just to sort of clean up. And, you know, I'll do it fairly thoroughly. There's just some background stuff I want you to sort of pick up on about this stuff. So, let's see. Also, because last time we met, I wanted to get through the routing stuff fairly quickly. No, I wanted to get through the routing stuff because that's the last stuff that will be on the exam. And, you know, so I skipped over, you know, I didn't come back and do that last week because I wanted to get through all of that stuff, material first. And then later tonight, we're gonna talk about naming and addressing, which probably is not on the exam and is probably the most important topic in this entire course. Before that though, if you'll remember back 2 or 3 weeks ago, we got hung up on this diagram. Now, does this make any more sense now than it did 2 or 3 weeks ago? Because we were having trouble with it.
It was about
Yeah. Now,
network
the
layers
question
last-
here was, we have a situation where we're talking about why there are 4 MAC addresses in one variation of the 802.11 header. Okay? And the reason, of course, is that there is, in a sense, 2 layers here. Okay? Because you want to be able to relay between access points. Now, generally, as you know, and you know, here, most all Wi-Fi networks are really just stars. Okay, you have your laptop is communicating to an access point within range, and that's the only thing it's doing. And so in that case, you know, 2 of those addresses are always going to be the same. So in that case, they only send 3 addresses. But if you're relaying between 2, you know, from access point to access point, you've got to tell it where it's going. Okay? And so in one sense, okay, so basically what we're going to have is, you know, what we're trying to do here is simulate an Ethernet over, you know, over the top of the relay. And so what we're going to say is we're going to have an address here that's going to be this sender and designate this receiver, and we're also going to have an address that says the ultimate destination, the ultimate source is here, but the destination is there. Okay? So in general, there may be a forwarding across access points, so that the first 2 addresses would be the source, sender, receiver, and they would change at every hop, because here, this sender would have this MAC address. Okay? And actually, that would be the same as this MAC address. And then the receiver would designate this access point. Then at here, this address would not be the address here, it would be the MAC address of this guy.
So he swaps it out.
Swaps it out, right? And it says, okay, the receiver is this guy over here. Okay? And then over the top of that, we have the ultimate source destination. So basically what we're doing is we're building an Ethernet. This is an Ethernet here. Let's play this as an Ethernet here. And we're relaying it, we're running it over a relaying network. That's basically what they're doing.
So IP address never changes, right? From one.
I'm sorry?
IP address doesn't change from one point to another.
IP address, we ain't got the IP addresses yet. Okay. Okay. All right, so, you know, and remember, why do we have addresses? We have addresses whenever the medium or the layer has more than 2 elements. Okay? Now, in a network, in a mesh, in a network made up of wires and it has a graph, that layer consists of a bunch of relays. Here, we have a situation, at Ethernet 2, we have a multi-access medium, either on the wire, you know, Ethernet, it's got to pass every station, it's going to go down the wire and pass every station, or here where it's wireless. Okay? Okay, and we're gonna see this again in a little bit. I'm gonna skip over the 802.16 stuff because that's really not terribly interesting. 802.16 this is the kind of stuff that you might use in rural areas. For example, I think for a while my brother got his internet access from line of sight off the top of the grain elevator in town. Right, it's that kind of situation where you would use it. It's much higher bandwidth, but it's much more rigid in its use. The one I wanted to get to, though, was one of my favorites, one that we all use, Bluetooth. And I have to say, Bluetooth has improved a lot. The original version of this protocol got my award as the worst protocol design of the 1990s. Okay, and it really shows what happens when you let radio engineers design protocols. They don't have a clue what they're doing. Now, Bluetooth came about, and it's also interesting to watch how what they come up with and how it changes once you get it built. Okay, the idea of Bluetooth was to have something that was very short range, like 10 meters. Okay, so whereas Wi-Fi is like 300 meters. Okay, in fact, when people first started talking about Bluetooth, my reaction was, okay, so we turn the antenna gain down on Wi-Fi and you've got Bluetooth. And they were like, well, Nokia. No, Ericsson wanted to do something different. They wanted to have their own. And so they were behind all this. Now here's the thing that, and these are the kinds of things you ought to be sensitive to when you're looking at something new. Okay, so the idea of this was it was going to replace the rat's nest of wires around your desk because, you had an external, drive and you had, a connection to a printer and, all this stuff was connected to your laptop or to your desk system. One thing they failed to recognize was, well, if I replace those wires with wireless, I don't need them to be close to my desk.
Change behavior.
Right, changes behavior, right? The printer can be down the hall, a lot further than 10 meters away, right? And so, it sort of had to recompute as to where it was going to be used. And so, we use it with, a mouse. We use it with speakers or something, the phone and the hands-free stuff in your car. Yeah.
If this was designed for 10 meters, and it was designed for like an office type environment, wouldn't the signals interfere in Bluetooth?
No, the way the physical media is moderated, you do spread spectrum and frequency hopping type stuff, and you can keep everybody out of each other's way.
Okay.
Now, the other thing they said was, we're going to have these PicoNets. And, the number of things you can have directly connected to your, and it's a master-slave environment, and you can have up to 7 devices in your PicoNet. This should,
It goes 1 trillion?
no,
Seven.
7.
7.
7.
Peak, okay.
PicoNet was just a thing of, it was just a marketing term for the network. It was a small
Gotcha.
network.
Okay.
That's what they were trying to get across. Okay, this should set off alarms. Because when they said you can have 7 devices in a PicoNet, you have to go, oh, come on, guys. Now, don't tell me you put a 3-bit field in the protocol. And if we have to expand it, we have to modify the protocol.
3-bit because it's 7.
Right.
Okay. I'm trying to put all these things together. I'm trying to.
Any good computer scientist should know all the powers of 2 to 16.
I know.
Well, 2 to the n minus 1. Anyway, so here we have 7, and sure enough, they did. Now, this wasn't the worst part of it. But then they said, oh, and then we can hook them together into scatter nets. Guys, if this is a master-slave, then the devices can only belong to one master. So how are you going to do this scatternet thing where you relay between piconets? They found out they didn't know when they were at a major technology show and tried to set up scatternet networks on the floor of the convention.
What is a scatter?
Hooking piconets together.
Okay, so it's an array of piconets.
Right,
Okay.
except that it didn't work.
Okay.
Because you can't be a slave to two masters. Okay? So anyway, these guys didn't really think things through very well. Then when you open up the documentation, and the first thing you see is an architecture picture that looks like this, which this was done back in the 90s when Palm Pilots were big. And basically, there is a different stack for every application. This thing is wrought through and through with special cases. Everything is a special case. It's horrible design. And in fact, it was even worse. Because I was reading the specs, and I found that, first of all, down here in this L2 cap stuff and link control stuff, there are MAC addresses. Well, if there are MAC addresses, why do I need 3-bit identifiers? Then I find out that, in addition to having 7 members of a piconet, you can have 64 devices which are not active but known. Okay? Now you should be thinking these guys are really dumb. Because if I have a MAC address, I don't need an identifier for this. The difference between being active and passive in the network is merely a mode, and that all I need to do is have a variable that says, what's the maximum number of things that can be active? Right? I don't need an identifier for it. I have a MAC address. Okay? So basically, they essentially box themselves into 7 devices. If they wanted to expand it, they had to launch into completely re-engineering the protocols. Now, since then, Nokia has actually simplified Bluetooth. It's a little bit better. It's not quite as many horrible special cases, but it's still a pretty ugly protocol. And actually, 802.11, as I said, 802, if you just turn the antenna gain down on 802.11, you probably could have used it. Actually, they do one other thing which I find really peculiar and I've never gotten an explanation for. In PowerSafe, one of the things with, of course, these wireless devices and things like mouse and other sorts of things, battery lifetime is a big deal, and saving battery lifetime is important. Okay. Now, in 802.11, beyond the scope of this class, they have a battery saving mode where the access point holds data for you. And if you're in power saving mode, the devices wake up on a clock. And the access point sends out a beacon message that says, I have stuff for you, or I don't. You're not in that list. Okay. Now, waking up and turning on your receiver takes a lot less power than waking up and turning on your transmitter. Okay? In Bluetooth, it's the opposite. If you're in power saving mode, you go to sleep, and every so often you wake up and send a message that says, do you have anything for me? And then you have to wait for a response. So you're actually using more power in battery saving mode than you would if you did it the other way. I've never gotten a good explanation of why they did it that way. Now, another area of wireless stuff, medium multi-access, that's very interesting is this whole area of RFIDs. You run into them, they come in all sorts of varieties. The fast lane stuff we have in our cars is an RFID. But the thing that makes these really interesting is that what you're doing Some of these you can actually print, or you could just stick them on a package. And so what you have is a chip that's embedded in a sticker with a bunch of stuff around it, a bunch of conductive stuff, which is the antenna. And the reader is putting out a very high-powered signal. Now remember, RF deteriorates at 1 over R squared, so it goes down real fast. But still, when you walk by these things, you're getting enough energy being picked up by this scheme of antenna here to actually power the chip to then turn around and send back a response, yeah?
I just wanted to ask something about the Bluetooth that you were talking about. Isn't part of the reason they do the addressing is so that they can identify your location? They use it as a location identifier?
You can't use it that way. I mean, you know, it takes more than one signal to do locating.
Yeah, I
Triangulation.
thought some people were referencing known databases of combinations of Bluetooth. I know they do that for
What's a combination of?
just the device combinations to give more specificity for your location.
You have to have multiple signals and signal strength to do that. And you might do that, but the identifier wouldn't help you with it.
I have a question on RFID. What you're saying here is essentially that these stickers, they're so, it's a lot like on the highway where you have these high beams going up to road signs. The road signs aren't emitting any light, but they're just really reflective. Is
Yeah.
that sort of, okay.
Okay, and these things, you know, you can have them, you know, stuck on packages and you walk by and basically there's enough, you can get enough power here to essentially send out a device code.
They absorb from a little bit, right?
They absorb the radio waves,
Yeah.
use that as energy to power the chip, which then in turn transmits something. And you can't transmit much,
But you don't need to.
but, you know, an inventory number is all you need, right? Because then you can go to a database and find out what it is.
It's a handful of bits.
Yeah, but there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on here. Yeah. And, you know, as you said, the reader sends out a tag, or sends out a signal requesting something, and then uses the backscatter off of the signal to pick up the tag, what the tag says. He talks about this some, I'm not gonna worry about it here. But if you're interested in this kind of thing, this is a really interesting thing to dig into. We just did the thing on learning bridges. We talked about how all that worked. We just went through the homework problem, so I think we had that. And again, this was a thing of, you know, in the 80s, it was really big to build really big LAN networks. And it got to be unwieldy because with every packet passing every station, you know, there was a lot of traffic. And also you found that if anybody went rogue on you, it could jam the entire Ethernet. And so trying to keep it efficient, because, you know, was a major thing. And so learning bridges were a major step in doing that. And we talked about that, see how, you know, it goes through the protocol, you know, the packet comes down from the network layers, encapsulated in Ethernet, so on, just the way you would think.
As for the physical layer, do we ever address NFC? Or is that
Oh, you mean
near field?
near field? It's not that different from the rest of these.
Okay.
You know, actually, that's one of the interesting things about all this IoT stuff. We've done a study of this in some of the advanced classes, and there's really not much new in this protocol. They made excuses for why they should have a new protocol. You really don't need them, but they do make good barriers to entry to competition. We can talk about, you know, there's an algorithm for creating a spanning tree. You know, we talked about spanning trees before in routing, where essentially what we're doing is we're building a tree that touches all of the nodes that have end devices in them, and then we replicate the packets only at the branches of the tree. And, you know, that means that, you know, some links will be left out of the tree, which makes it less efficient. Part of this was due to the idea that different layers did different functions. Okay, and so layer 3 was supposed to do routing, and layer 2 wasn't. Okay, that's really not a valid rationale. And in fact, right now, the kind of routing we talked about last time is actually being used in Ethernet. So they all do routing. Now, VLANs came about, and to some extent, I've always thought that this was something that should have been handled at a higher layer. The problem here that they were trying to solve is, okay, you got this big office, right? The office building, big floor, everything, and you'd like to have different departments on their own land. Now, in particular, you wouldn't want to have research, on the same land with accounting, or, especially the high-end research stuff, guys. Because they may be doing some experiment and screw things up and jam the thing, and nobody cares because they're all involved in doing research, but the accounting guys are going crazy, right? So, you would go out and you would say, okay, the accounting guys are over here, the research guys are over here, and we run the land for these guys, and of course, then what happens in every organization, well, a couple of guys leave over here and a couple of guys leave over there, and then of course at different times, and so now we hire somebody for the research guy, but the only place we can open cubicle is over here, and so we would like to, put him on the research land.
So it's incredibly rigid.
Huh?
It's incredibly rigid the way it's set.
Right, so we have to do this physically.
Yeah.
Right? And a rewire, so some poor guy's locked in a wiring closet for days on end, just redoing everything. And people got to the point of saying, wait a minute, this is crazy. We need to do something more logical. We need to be able to do this without having to physically rewire. Because also, obviously, when you were doing this stuff, you were making mistakes, which was even worse, right? So they came up with this idea of VLANs, virtual LANs, okay? And so what they want to do is, over the same media, have different local area networks running at the same time, okay? But they're kept separate, okay? So, and the way they sort of talk about this, and they want to make it backward compatible, of course. So they said, okay, suppose we have green, or gray and white local VLANs, and but we also have some legacy guys, and so we have to be able to convert them back and forth. Okay, and so we're going to do the conversion here at the bridges. So if you're a VLAN aware device and you connect in, you'll come in, you'll have your VLAN identifier configured, and you'll come in and everything will be okay. If you're a legacy device who doesn't know about VLANs, then this bridge here will say, oh, okay, I know this guy is a legacy device and he's on this VLAN, and when I get a VLAN packet for him, I'll take the identifier out of it and ship him a normal Ethernet packet.
Is it the Ethernet card in the device that labels it, or is it the port in the bridge that labels it?
It's when you the device configuration is known to the outside world, and so to some extent, yes, to some extent when it's connected, there's enough difference in the way the packet header looks like that the bridge can determine if it's legacy or not. Now, what did they? Okay. So what do they do to do this? Now remember, this turns up in like the early 2000s. And so at this point, Ethernet headers have been in the world for like 20 years, right? If there's anything that's sacred, it's an Ethernet header, okay? And here we're going to change it, okay? So everybody was really nervous about this. So what they did was they said, okay, we're going to take this length field here, and we're going to expand it just a little bit. But we're going to have to make the maximum packet size larger. Okay? And of course, that in itself was a radical idea in the Ethernet world. So since VLAN tag is only used by hubs and switches and equipment, it doesn't need it. Okay, so since VLAN is only used by hubs and switches, end equipment doesn't really need it. It can be backward compatible. The first VLAN aware device adds the tag. The last one removes it. This raises the maximum transmission unit from 1,518 bytes to 1,522. Okay, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a big change. The VLAN type being greater than 1,500 indicates it's a type and not a length. Okay, so by looking at those bits, if those bits where the link field was are greater than 1,500, then you know that this is a VLAN aware device, and you parse it as a tag. Okay? Now, so you have 12 bits of VLAN ID. In other words, 4096, right? The PRI field is priority, and the CFI field, believe it or not, is to designate that it's token ring. Believe it or not, there's still token ring out there. There is, okay. And, so basically this is what we're doing. So this identifier can be set to any number between 0 to 4096, and that identifies different VLANs.
495.
Yes. And now, actually, this is proven to be way too few. Okay, and they've gone through great hoops to make it larger and larger by encapsulating VLANs and VLANs. Now, I contend that VLANs and Wi-Fi are the same thing. Okay?
VLAN can be done over Ethernet though, right?
Right, VLAN is done over wire, and Wi-Fi is done over wireless.
But it's the same idea, same.
But they're basically the same idea in that they are multiple layers of the same rank over the same medium. Okay? Multiple VLANs are multiple layer 2s on a common medium. Right? Wi-Fi, you go home at night and pull down a little thing on your PC to see how many Wi-Fi networks you can see. That's multiple layer 2s on that common ether, medium, common wireless medium.
You can't connect to more than one on your.
You can't, well, okay.
Right? So you don't really have two of them, 2 layer 2s running on your wireless card.
No, okay. Strictly speaking, no, but that's because the protocol doesn't let you do it. Okay? But you could do it. Okay. But, yeah.
Professor, so, for example, can I sign 2 VLAN from my computer?
I'm sorry?
Can I use 2 VLAN in one computer?
No, you can't. Not today. Okay? But what you're doing is essentially running multiple layers on the same medium. And so for one of the projects in my advanced class, we actually unified Wi-Fi and VLAN to be a single protocol.
Speaking of projects, at some point, could we address the project? Okay,
Sure. Okay, all right. This has gotten really, really big. There are a ton of standards on this, and they're using it for everything. In fact, as I said, 4096 turned out to be not even close to enough. And so it gets really complicated in that, especially in data centers where they're using this to keep things separate. And they're running into all sorts of problems with the fact that they didn't have a good architecture to start with. But the problem, the thing is, So they're now doing, something called Q and Q, which is VLAN. It's called Q and Q because this standard is called 802.1Q. And they're essentially encapsulating Ethernet to do that. So you get 24096s. They're also doing MAC and MAC, essentially encapsulating MAC addresses and MAC headers and MAC headers, so to get different MAC stuff. It's just gotten way out of hand.
Is it sort of like this might be wrong, but is it sort of like an IP address
It's like tunneling an IP, right?
within a local, like a LAN?
Yeah. Now, the thing is, they're also using, just for kicks, they're also using ISIS routing in Ethernet. But they did something really interesting in order to make it loop-free. Okay? They did not introduce a time to live field here. Right? Remember, IP has a time to live field. Right? And if there are loops in the routing algorithm, the time to live field squelches packets that are looping. It doesn't get rid of the loops. In fact, there's nothing that says the next routing update won't sustain the loops. Okay? What these guys did, because this is local area networks, smaller scope, okay, is they said, okay, we're going to do routing updates with the Dijkstra algorithm. And then you're going to hash the routing table and exchange it with your nearest neighbor. If the hashes don't agree, then you do the route that everyone has consistent databases, and therefore there are no loops. Okay? There's some real interesting stuff going on here. And actually on that stuff, I have been able to find a lot of published experimentation with it. And when I talk to most of the computer science people who are doing networking research, they don't even know that 802 has done this. So I think there's some real interesting stuff to look at here. Anyway, so that's all the multi-access media stuff. Before we, let's take a real quick 5-minute break, and then I'll come back and we'll start on the really important naming and addressing stuff. Okay? I started to write something on naming and addressing many years ago. And I remember reading that to my kids entirely too many times. And so I thought it would be fun to use, start the quote, with that. But of course, when you do Dr. Seuss, you've got to, you can't sit, pick it up and get it all. You have to read the whole thing again, right? And it starts out, as I said, did I ever tell you about Mrs. McCabe who had 23 sons and she named them all day? Well, she did, and that wasn't a very smart thing to do, because now when she calls you, come to the house, Dave, all 23 of her sons come around. And then she wishes she'd named them. And it goes into one of those wonderful litanies of Dr. Seuss names. And I've got this on the line someplace. Maybe at a break sometime I'll read them off to you. But I had forgotten how it ended. And I got to the end, but she didn't do it. And now it's too late. And I thought, wow, if there was ever advice for naming and addressing in networks, that's it. We knew from operating systems that if you didn't get the naming and addressing right, life was hell. But if you got it right, everything went like glass. And it made us a little gun shy. So, this is one of those things where you have to be really, really careful. This is probably the single most important topic in network architecture. And it's not, what I'm going to talk about tonight is not covered in any of the textbooks. None of them even broach it. And it's also one of the least understood by most of the people in the field. if you really understand this lecture and the next one that goes with it, which we may or may not get to tonight, you'll know more about naming and addressing than 90% of the professors who teach networking courses. It's also one of the most difficult and subtle topics. Sometimes it seems like you're doing philosophy instead of engineering. And although names have figured heavily in philosophy and in logic, it is naming as it relates to language. And while it's informative, it really doesn't the problem that we have here. It's not really germane to it, because our problem is really addressing. The internet has several addressing related problems today. Address space exhaustion, which is the least of the problems. The multi-homing problem, which I'll get to in a moment. Mobility is cumbersome and complex. Router table size is exploding on us. We've got real problems we have to deal with. And again, this is one of those things where being precise about your definitions is absolutely key. One of the things I said in the first lecture, one of the things I was, well, I put it in the Wittgenstein thing about climbing the ladder, throwing away the ladder. If the Tractatus ends with statement 7, that of which we cannot speak, we must pass over in silence. In other words, if you can't precisely define your terms, shut up. We're going to have to worry about that. Now, early naming and addressing in networks, in the telephone networks, telephone numbers were the name of the wire that came to your phone. And I talked about that early on. Okay? The network was basically a tree, and the phone number was a path through the tree. There was minimal function in the end devices. Much more, and not much more in the network. Early networks simply labeled the ports as the address. Okay, that's all they did. And so it seemed, intuitive, but it was really sloppy thinking. And networks, this leads to thinking that the address of a port is the address of the end equipment. Which, for phones and early terminal networks, that was the case. So, what do we already know about this? Well, not a lot, but what we know is significant. We know that a layer with more than 2 members at relays requires addresses to know where to deliver the PDUs. A layer with 2 members only needs a local identifier to distinguish it from others. Okay? And that identifier never needs to exist in protocol. Right? And so if it's a point-to-point wire, and you put it in one end, there's only one place it can come out, the other end. If a layer is to have more than one user using the same protocol, it requires port IDs to isolate the users of the layer from the layer, and connection endpoint IDs to distinguish which PDUs belong to which flows. The connection endpoint identifiers are carried in protocol, but port IDs are not. This is actually fairly significant. Now, the internet has got considerable problems with addressing, and they all start at the ARPANET. In the early ARPANET, and you heard me talk about this a little bit when we were in the first lectures, you had these imps, the switches, and they could have, actually, the early imps could only support 1 host. But eventually, they could either have 4 hosts or 4 56K lines. And your host address, especially when there was only one connected to it, was essentially your import number. So when I say that, you know, my original network address was 12, we were the 12th imp installed in the ARPANET. Okay? And, you know, so, you know, it was fairly simple, you know, it was a straightforward thing to do. So was there a reason? Sure. It was easy. We were building an experimental network. Nobody had done one of these things before. Was there a lot of thought given to how addressing should work? No, not really. We had a lot of other hard problems to solve, like how to pass data. You know, I mean, you know, we had a bunch of computers that had not been built to talk to other computers, and we had to figure out how to make that happen. Worse than that, the guys building the network had to figure out how to get the bits from one end to the other without things locking up or getting corrupted or whatever. So we had a lot of problems to solve, and naming and addressing was the least of them. And we knew it was a hard problem, so, you know, we didn't mind putting it off. Did it take long to realize it was a problem? Nope. Not at all. First imps go in late 1969. Really, we get a network in 1970. And by 1972, we ran into the first addressing problem. Actually, it was early in 1972. It was the middle of winter. And my boss comes in and says, Tinker Air Force Base is going to join the net, and they're holding us to it. And, you know, they want to have 2 connections to the network for redundancy. And I said, oh yeah, great, shh, it's not going to work. Okay? This is what they wanted. This shows up, the problem with naming the port, taking your host address from the port. Because, again, we go back to von Forrester, you know, looking at the problem from the point of view of the organism, not the observer. To the network, to you, looking at this picture, the host has redundant connections. To the network, it looks like it's connected to 2 different hosts. The network has no way of knowing that these 2 lines go to the same place because they're different addresses. Well, a half second after I said, oh, it's not going to work, I said, oh, I'm an OS guy. I know the answer to this problem. We got to have a logical address space over the physical address space. We have to name the host, the node, not the interface. Okay? However, the internet still does it this way. Now, computers, what this brings up is that computers are quite different than phones and terminals. Phones and terminals are passive in the network. They're just attached. Computers are active. They participate in the network. You know, if you take a look at this one, what should host A's address be? 3 or 11? Well, the network isn't routing. What this tells us is the network isn't routing to the host at all. It's routing to the end of to that wire. We need it to route to the host. It's only routing to the port. We need it to route to the host. Okay? This is what really distinguishes datacom and phone systems from computer networks.
So, I have 2 questions with this. When you say it's not routing to the host, or it's routing to the port, not routing to the host as a problem,
Yeah.
are you saying that if none of the other ones are labeled, but let's say that purple square in the bottom below 5.3,
Yeah.
if that's trying to get to host A and the shorter path is through router 3 or node 3, then it would take that if it was going off, no?
No. I can route to 5 or I can route to 23. Okay?
But what I'm saying is, wouldn't it just choose the shortest path?
well, there's big choose the shortest path. It doesn't know that those things go to the same place.
I'm just saying, why would it need to know? Why can't it just go this way?
Well, no, because well, to the idiot, it looks like two hosts. Remember, the port ID is your host name. That says that there are two hosts, 5 and 23. The fact that they go to the same place, to the observer, you sitting there, you know those two wires go there. To the network, he didn't know that.
Gotcha.
He has no idea that happens. Right? To him, it looks like they're two different hosts, 5 and 23. Okay? So telephone and terminals are not really part of the network, but hosts are. Hosts actually participate.
And this is all before you had the connection versus connectionless debate.
This is all before that.
So even though this problem was recognized and they said this is inherently fundamentally different than telephones, it still continues to telecom.
Right. Well, actually, as you can imagine, very few of the hosts in the ARPANET were dually connected. And in fact, for a very long time, even through the 80s, the vast majority of hosts only had a single connection. I mean, I don't know how many professors I've caught when I said, the IP address, I'd say the IP address doesn't name the host. They, oh, yes, it does. No, it names the interface. Okay? And, there was a couple of sheepish looks when they found, well, yeah, okay, but you've got to be precise about this stuff. Okay?
So how does the device work on then telephones? How does it work on telephones then?
Well, a telephone can only have one thing going to it. It doesn't make any sense to have two wires going to a phone, especially an old phone where it was an electrical connection, right? I mean, that's really the difference here, right? The phone was just electrically connected to the wire, and the voice was right on. In fact, you wouldn't believe how many, we haven't gotten to this yet, but you wouldn't believe how many people have tried to argue that voice was a physical layer phenomena, not an application.
I mean, these days it's
Yes.
an application, but back in the day it wasn't. It was just physical.
Even in the
So-
80s, they said it was an application.
Did you say like at one point everything was like on 1G? It was even then it was all analog. It was all like vinyl.
Well, the phone system, prior to 1975 or so, was purely physical layer. Purely physical layer. Right? I mean, when, you've seen the old thing in the movies where they do the blood board?
Yeah.
Right? So they were setting up a physical electrical connection. Okay? And the microphone was oscillating that waveform over that electrical connection. End of story. Okay? This is what was going on. This was what was different. This was a significant difference. So I always said that BBN botched the ARPANET addressing because they're from Boston. Okay? And as you all know, in Boston, there's only one way to get anywhere, so it's easy to confuse a route and an address. Now, if they were from the Midwest, from God's country, where we live on a grid like you're supposed to, you know that there's more than one way to get anywhere. And then addresses and routes are two entirely different things. It's not true, but it makes a good story. I mean, as I said, all the BBN guys really did was, they had a lot of problems to solve. Addressing was not the top of the line, and they just did what everybody else did. Okay? Okay. It just didn't take us long to run into that. Okay? So what's going on here really when we're doing routing? Well, let's just take a look very carefully what goes on. Now, remember, IP names the interface, but this is the case of how it should work. Okay, so a layer 2 PDU comes in here. It's got a source and destination address. It arrives from a wire. The layer 2 protocol machine processes the header, discovers that the 2 destination is my address.
2 is the, what's the 2 stand for?
Right?
Is it layers?
No, what?
Yeah, layer 2.
Okay.
Oh,
Remember we talked about NPDUs? Well, I just substituted a number for N.
Gotcha.
Okay? So it comes in, layer 2 PDU comes in, it's got my address on it. Okay, strip off the header. Well, look at the connection ID on the port. That tells me what port to hand it up to the layer 3. I hand it up to layer 3 and he says, aha, here's a layer 3 PDU.
Layer 3 is network layer?
Huh?
Network layer?
No, it's layer 3.
Data link layer?
It's layer 3.
Okay.
Doesn't matter what layer it is. Doesn't matter if it has a name. It's above layer 2.
What's its role?
To forward packets.
So like the network layer?
No, all layers forward packets.
Okay, you understand what I'm trying to get at?
Yes, and it's not irrelevant.
Okay.
And that's why I'm giving you a hard time about it. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. The layers do not have roles. All layers do the same functions. They just do it for a different range of the problem.
That's one of the things I wondered is, are you asked, I get that message really clear for me. What's unclear to me is because I've gotten that message so clear, I sometimes find myself wondering which layer I'm in when I'm looking at a layer. Do you expect us to know which layer we're in whichever
That
model?
depends on what the problem is. You know, no, I mean, really, in fact, I just described to you that we're using ISIS in Ethernet, right? Is that layer 3? Is that the network layer?
I don't know, I don't remember that part of the lecture.
You know, all of the layers are doing the same things. Okay? Now, the idea that layers had different roles came from the Dijkstra operating system paper, where he said that in operating systems, you do a function in a layer, you don't have to repeat it after that. Now, when he did that, computers were very, very, very tiny.
I was gonna say, Dexter did his algorithm like the late 50s. This is before any of this stuff.
Well, actually, 68.
Dexter's algorithm was 68?
Yep. Okay? The THE operating system paper appears in 68.
Okay.
And, you know, and that was what it, now, for a while, we all tried to do what you were saying, that each layer had a different function and different role, and we fulfilled that role. The trouble was, it never worked. We always found that there were functions that kept repeating. In fact, I would even contend that the Ethernet approach to using spanning trees was a euphemism for routing. That basically they were calling it a spanning tree because most people didn't know that routing algorithms used spanning trees too, and they were trying to stay out of the political mess. Okay? Now, what happens is Dijkstra was not wrong. Layers, functions do not repeat in the same scope. So layers with different scope, you know, you haven't performed those functions over that scope yet. So you will have to, they will repeat, but they don't repeat over the same scope. Okay?
Just one last question.
Yeah.
What happened with router if he get the IP address, I mean the wrong IP address? Not
It forwards to the wrong place.
I mean, there is a question on the homework. assume that all rotors and hosts are working properly in that, and that is circular or both freewheel.
Yeah.
What- Is there any chance, however small, that packets will be delivered
Yeah? You
to
expect
the
me to tell you
wrong
the answer?
destination?
Do you expect me to tell you the answer?
No, we already given the. So the question is, we will get the router, get the IP address. What happened?
He will look it up in the table and forward it.
Or just delete it?
Only if the time to live field is 0.
So if time to live belongs to the packets, right?
Yeah, or
They
if
will
the,
just
or if
minus
the,
one.
or if the two reasons you'll delete it. The header checksum fails, or the time to live field is 0.
Okay, but header checks will produce it by router, or it's already inside the packet?
The header checksum,
Yes.
it's in the packet.
So the router will do nothing with this?
No, he'll have to check it, see if it's right.
Mhm.
He'll have to compute the checksum over the header and see if it agrees with the one in the packet. Right?
But is it possible that router will just accept it?
I don't know, is it? That's right. So anyway, the layer 2 protocol machine here has stripped off the layer 2 header, handed it up to layer 3. Layer 3 looks at it, looks at the destination address and says, this isn't my address. Okay, so what do I do with it? I consult my forwarding table, and I index down and see what port am I supposed to send this out on. Okay, that's what the forwarding table that the router has been calculating, the routing table, the routing algorithm has been calculating, tells me. At which point, he will take that packet, hand it through that port ID down to this layer 2 guy, and forwards the packet out, and it goes out and goes along. That's how routing works.
And in current IP, that's how it works.
Yep. Sort of. Actually, yes, it is.
This function is happening at the router, correct?
Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you set up, like, your laptop and say you can also use me as a router?
Good question, because I can broadcast Wi-Fi from my laptop.
Well, you broadcast Wi-Fi from your laptop, but can I? Okay.
You'll still need a switch. 'Cause you have to-
Okay, there are things called ad hoc networks.
Yeah.
They use Wi-Fi that you can set up a network and forward packets among the thing. Your laptop probably does not have software to actually participate in a wired routing algorithm that,
Right. But
Okay.
theoretically, you can
Now,
install it.
theoretically, it could.
Yeah.
Okay, now the intent, because of history, when hosts were still pretty strict, constrained on resources, people, had the idea that the host should not be participating in the routing. Okay, and in fact, one of the excuses for not solving the multi-homing problem, or not, doing something like that, was that a lot of hosts don't want to be used as a transit. No. In other words, they don't want to forward packets, they just want packets that come to them. To which my response has always been, well then don't advertise that you're on a path to anything but you.
But I used to the PC as a router.
Yeah, you can use a PC as a router, you can
That's what I'm
load the
saying.
right software in.
Because I use FreeBSD and I have a.
But remember, a PC is a universal Turing machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it will execute any program you put in it. It has nothing to do with the fact that it's a PC.
So I guess the question I'm asking is like, I'm just envisioning like a family in a house, right? the Wi-Fi is great in some areas and bad in others. And you can say, you know, I'm gonna enable my laptop to be a router within the home. And I'm doing work in the living room so that, you know, my wife or whoever in the bedroom has better.
That is supported, I think, by 802.11.
Yeah,
But it's more likely what you would do is put another access point
A client bridge.
and do relaying from
Yeah,
access
right.
point to access point.
yeah. Just curious, yeah.
Yeah.
Just on that same note, what's the difference between broadcasting the Wi-Fi and, I'm thinking like Bluetooth, RFID, Wi-Fi?
Yeah.
What is a hotspot? Is that Wi-Fi as well?
Hotspot is what a access point is.
Okay, gotcha.
It's
Same
just a
thing.
router sitting there.
Yeah.
It's a fancy name.
It's
huh?
it's a router that is wireless on one side and wired on the other.
Or like a phone hotspot where it's mobile data,
Yeah.
so it's wireless to wireless?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay?
I thought routers, the function of a router was not only to build its own routing table, right? To use back and forth, but you needed to know where you're going to create and generate those tables, right?
Yeah.
So your home router only goes as far as to.
Well, remember, all of the, especially the linked state algorithms require perfect knowledge of the graph.
Yep.
So they're all limited. They're only, they're called intra-domain routing protocols
Okay.
because they're limited to a single domain.
State domain.
And domain is defined as whatever you want it to be.
But it's a range, it's an average range. You wouldn't be able to collect the entire domain of whatever you want. You would run this.
Well, no, you can't, remember, IP addresses are only 32 bits.
Entire internet.
You could have an ISIS routing domain at 100,000 routers.
On a phone router.
Yep. Yep. Not sure I recommend it, but you can do it.
One follow-up, you said link state required perfect knowledge of the entire
Correct.
graph. And then Dijkstra needs partial knowledge? Is that-
No, Dijkstra is linked state.
Oh, okay.
Okay, now remember, yeah,
Just quickly, the forwarding table, that gets updated through ACTS, let's say how long that took for that packet to get there. So like, how does a router come to understand how long it takes, so that I can send that to other people?
no. Well, okay, the routing algorithms, remember, the way it works, this is what I was about to say. Remember how we looked at the Dijkstra algorithm? The way this is going to work is every router in this domain is going to exchange routing information on what he thinks the load is and the cost is for
Yeah.
everything, every other node.
Yeah.
They're going to then execute the Dijkstra algorithm, building a spanning tree originating at them.
Okay.
Okay? Now, that will have an optimal path to every router that's in this domain that router can get to.
Yeah.
Okay. He then takes the next hop and says, okay, what port is that next hop on?
Yeah.
Builds the forwarding table. Throws the rest of the information away. Now, because any subpath of an optimal path is optimal, when he gets to the next router, he's done the same thing,
Right.
but he's got an optimal path to that too.
So maybe he is more current.
Right. But because all of these subpaths, i.e. one hops, are optimal,
Yeah.
the whole path is optimal. Okay, now, what do you use for a metric?
Yeah.
Whatever you want. Common thing is to use Q length. Okay? How long are the queues that you got? In other words, what's your load? Well, obviously that's easily measured.
Right.
Okay? We don't tend to measure time. Although, as we've gotten more and more compute power, there's more, propagation time has become more dominant and that's become more of an issue. So there is a tendency to do that. But for the most part, we've stayed away from those. Okay?
One more thing, when we were going over all of that, the routing algorithms last class, there was the propagation delay, there's bi-directional graph, there's propagation delay going one way, propagation delay going the other way. Well, I mean, it could be anything, but it's
Well,
an edge delay.
there was a weight on the graph.
So a weighted edge,
Yeah, there was a
Yeah.
metric on the graph.
but the nodes also had a weight. They had like 3 inside or 5 or
No, those
8
were
or-
just labels.
No, it had V1 and V6, but also in
Right.
V6 it had infinity until we actually went.
No, those were node numbers, they were not weights. They didn't enter into the calculation,
Okay.
right? Go back and look. Okay, now, this is what happens if the layer 3 address is addressing that. Now, if the address is addressing the interface, then you get something that looks more like this. Okay, now this is what, if you believe, this is what most people believe IP is doing. But in point of fact, it isn't. Okay? The people who build routers are smarter than the IETF, and they actually do this. They just don't tell anybody. Okay? Now, let's move on.
Are you going to the masks? Is that where you're going?
Huh? No, they actually define a IP address that is a node address. This is the other part of this. You will hear them say it's the loopback address,
Yeah, I've heard that.
okay?
127.
But it's not. If you think about it, how can I route on the loopback address if the prefix is 127? Right? I mean, it's not going to be unique. Okay? And when you call them on it, they go, oh yeah, well, no, it's really just an IP address. We just call it the loopback address. This is the level of precision that is going on in your everyday world right now. Okay? Now, but let's go back to what we were trying to do here. We were using, as I've said, we used operating system as our guide. We looked at operating systems for a model for all of this stuff. And the solution to the multi-homing problem was obvious. Actually, I hate to say it, but I thought it was obvious, but it turns out that a lot of people didn't see it. By analogy, in an operating system, we have application names, virtual addresses, physical addresses, and the roots are in the hardware. Addresses need to name the node, not the port. This problem had not existed in the phone networks. So if we know that the answer was 72, why haven't we fixed it? Actually, no other network that was built in the 70s made this mistake. Only the internet did. So basically, we want to pattern this after what's going on in operating systems. Now, we learned a few things. John Schock wrote a really nice little paper in 78. I think it was circulating earlier than that. And he says, application names tell you what you want to get to. Network addresses tell you where it is. And routes tell you how to get there. Now, one thing we've noticed is that the scope of layers tends to increase the higher in the architecture. Okay? And that means that an address only has to be unambiguous within the scope of the layer.
Question on the second point. After the network layer is the same scope for that and everyone above it, right? The lowest level end to end?
Sometimes. We'll come back to that.
Okay.
An address, only has to be. Consequently, MAC addresses are really 3 times longer than they need to be. Take 1 kilometer, Ethernet cable, right? What, 3 times, it's what, 16 bits? You think you can get 65,000 devices on it?
Well, you said that they wanted to, is like
They
the
wanted
number
to
of
make it-
pounds in the.
Yeah,
tons
right.
in the-
However, I tell you, that was a nice little thing, at that time. However, MAC addresses have become a major security problem.
How so?
Because they have greater scope than IP addresses and they can be used to track you. Your MAC address is burned, is burned into your machine at the factory, we know who you are. Right?
The MAC address will keep in the one domain, right? They will not.
Well, there are people out there who say, we want to put your MAC address in the bottom of all of your IPv6 addresses. How do you like them out?
No, I mean, in previous slides, Professor, you said that the MAC address will be switched to another one, right? So the person
Yeah.
who stay there after the.
But remember, there's a MAC address above that that's being passed along. That was only for relaying within the Wi-Fi network. But there's a source and destination MAC address that's there. And like I said, there are people who are arguing, they finally actually said after, 15 years, somebody actually said, no, we're not going to tell you you can't do it, but we're going to discourage you from doing it. This actually makes bad addressing as well, not just security. Addresses must be assigned. Address is a location-dependent identifier. It identifies where in the network you are. Consequently, to be an address, it should be assigned by the network. MAC addresses are not really addresses, they're device IDs. This is where you start getting into trouble.
So sorry, when you're like doing Wi-Fi, the MAC address is sort of irrelevant, right? You're only using an IP address
No, you're using MAC addresses.
in the physical layer of it.
Yep, in the link layer. Yeah, you're using MAC addresses. They don't know about IP addresses. They never see it.
I see. So that's carried in the packet and says, is this me?
Everything is done in terms of MAC addresses.
But ultimately it gets past the network layer that does the routing.
Except when they use ISIS and the Ethernet layer.
Right. Well, right, I'm saying Wi-Fi.
Right. Well, okay. Yeah. Okay. But it doesn't matter.
Because ultimately it gets past it.
Never define an address by concatenating an identifier in this layer with one from the lower layer. Now, this sounds intuitively obvious to do rather than not do it. Okay? And of course, this is what we do with file names, right? Right? But this is a bad idea, because what this is doing is it's making the address route dependent. This says that if I put an n-1 identifier in the n address, that is defining a path up through the stack. And that will thwart any multi-homing solution. Okay?
Why?
Now,
Because it ties you to the network card?
huh?
Why? Because it ties you to a network card?
And then ties it to a particular interface. Right? And that's the interface you're going to be looking for. Right? Whereas in a network, there are multiple paths up through the stack, and we want to use any of them. Okay? Now, the thing here is, this is counterintuitive because, like I said, we use this for file names, right? What is your fully qualified, file name? It's the list of the directories followed by the file name, right? Okay? It works there. But go back and think about what Multics called a file name. They called it a path name because it was a path through the directory. Okay? For files, that's what we want. For addressing, we don't want that. Now, we may have a hierarchical address in a layer to tell us where in the layer it is, but we don't use it across layers. At least not by appending it to the end. Later, I'll show you a technique that actually lets you do it.
So it says don't put embedded MAC address in an IP address.
Right.
So how to understand this sentence?
What do you mean? Don't do it.
Okay, so we have embedded in chip MAC address, right?
Yep.
So
So now
How
suppose you have
user-
two, so now you have two MAC interfaces on the same computer.
two MAC address, so two interfaces.
Two interfaces.
Physical.
With, yep, two physical interfaces, same computer, two different MAC addresses.
And can I do this
Oh, you can do it.
so that I can switch it between them or?
No, you won't be able to deliver anything. You'll have done exactly the same thing the ARPANET did that created the multi-homing problem. Because now you will be routing to that MAC address.
I just try to imagine, okay, I'm a computer and I have two interfaces, left and right.
Right.
So how can I put one address in IP address? So I have one MAC address here and one MAC address here.
Right.
So how is,
So if I put them in the back, depending on which one I send it out, if I put the left one I send IP addresses out the left-hand one, I put the left MAC address in there, then it's only going to come back to that interface.
I see.
It won't know that the other one's available too.
I see.
It doesn't know those two things go to the same place.
So there is a, it have to be like a two cable have to connect it.
Addresses between layers have to be independent. There cannot be a path dependency on the addresses. Further refined, in 1982, Jerry Salzer publishes the other major paper. Finally, someone wrote down, it says, that there were application names, node addresses, points of attachment, and then routes were actually the sequence of addresses. And then the three mappings between them. Jerry is an operating system guy, and he was doing exactly what operating systems do. And it's an interesting paper. It's a real hard read. But if you work through it, you'll begin to get, what's going on. Oddly, he sees a problem, an issue that makes networks different, but he doesn't understand what it means. So this is what Jerry came up with. That application names map application names to node addresses, which map to points of attachment, and then routes are through here. Okay, now what's wrong with it? Well, in networks, I can have multiple wires between the same two nodes.
Say that again?
I can have multiple wires between the same two next hops. Okay, and that actually happens a lot, because if I have a lot of bandwidth, a lot of capacity trying to go between two places, and I can't buy a wire big enough, I gotta run multiple wires. Okay, now look what's going to happen here. If I do this, my router table is my router calculation is going to explode. Because in this situation, there's one path. In this situation, there are 27. And I haven't even done anything complicated.
So it's loop.
No loops. At every hop, I have a choice of 3. You take 3 things, 3 at a time, you get 27.
Loops from 1 to 27. I see.
Okay? And of course, this doesn't happen in operating systems, but it happens in networks.
Explain a little bit that visual.
Well, this is looking at it from the top, and this is looking at it from the side.
I got that, but if that's first circle on the left, it's gonna pass to the second bottom, the bottom. Or the-
Right.
That second diagram on the top. It says view from the top. The one at the bottom. It says-
Bottom, it's the one on the bottom.
So each circle, is that a router?
Well, no, it's a protocol machine at this layer.
Right.
Routers are boxes.
No, get that. I was referring to the bottom picture.
Oh, these, yeah, well, these are those systems.
But why, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4 routers. Why, how did you get 20?
The links between them, there are 3 choices, you have 3 links.
Oh, the 3 links for each
So it's
router.
3 common.
Yeah,
Okay, that's the part I was missing. So you're running 3 cables.
3 cables between each hop,
Thank you, that's what I was missing.
okay?
Yeah.
All right. So, this is gonna blow up on us, big time. So what we really want to find out is that we have a directory that maps application names to node addresses. Then we want to say that our routes are sequences of node addresses. And then we need to know the mapping of our node to point of attachment mappings of all of our nearest neighbors to choose which wire. So first we want to find, what's our next hop, irrespective of how many wires there are. And then given that, what's our next thing we do? Okay? Which wire do we pick? That's what's really going on. Now, the interesting thing from this is notice that this mapping and this mapping are the same mapping. They're both nearest neighbors.
In this case, so we have, each router has 3 tables, same as previous.
Yeah, could have 10 for all I know.
Which are the same?
I mean, in previous.
This mapping here at the top and this mapping here are the same mapping. They're mappings between nearest neighbors. Nearest neighbors at this layer, nearest neighbors at this layer. This is a repeating structure. Okay? The same function.
We went over this first lecture, right?
Nope. Oh, wait. No, we didn't. No. Okay? All right? Now, to recap, the mappings between these namespaces is that the mapping between application names and node addresses, usually called a directory, allows applications to move to different systems and don't change their names, but they change their address. Sequences of node addresses are routes. The node address space is an abstraction of the point of attachment address space. From this, we determine the next hop. The mapping of node addresses to point attachment addresses. The node needs to keep this mapping for itself and all its nearest neighbors. The point of attachment distinguishes below paths to the next node. Notice something. We've never named the host. We've never named the box. Naming the host is irrelevant.
We did this after we got covered back with those.
I'm sorry?
Because once the host sends something, it's not sending it to itself.
No. We never name the host. We name the processes in the host, but we don't name the host. Okay? So this is another piece of sloppy thinking you will hear from the internet, that IP addresses name the host. They don't. The way you want to think about it is what an address names is the thing that strips it off the packet. Okay? This was a bit of a revelation years ago because we kept thinking this. And in fact, when we did this analysis the first time, actually not the analysis I showed you here, but at least the first exercise of it, the first thing we defined was a host name from the system identifier. And we started going through the layers, deciding what identifiers, trying to discover what identifiers we needed to make it work. And as we went down one side and we started out the other side, it became obvious that we were never going to need to know the name of the system. We just needed the name of the process that we were going to send the packet to. Now, host name system identifier may be useful for management, what's going on with all the stuff in this box, but as far as setting up communications and stuff, it has nothing to do with it. Now, let's apply this. Here's the internet. Here's the problem is, the most striking feature of this is that half the addresses we need aren't there. IP addresses are point of attachment addresses. We have no node addresses and we have no application names. Domain names are synonyms for IP addresses. URLs are a path name through the stack and are location dependent. Okay? Yeah. Basically, this is like having your computer with, only work with absolute memory addresses. This is this is how the internet works. It's like a computer with no virtual memory or application. Now, in the OSI stack, you actually have, the whole kit and caboodle. You have point of attachment addresses in the lower part of the network layer. You have internet addresses in the top part of the layer. And you have application names.
What's OSI?
Huh?
The 7 layer.
So there's TCP/IP and OSI. They condensed this from 7 to 5, the OSI of the layers. They use the TCP/IP protocols.
Well, we can talk about this much later, but eventually I can tell you about how the internet lost the internet layer. Okay?
It's a tough break.
Yeah, tough break. So then we have the first great internet crisis. This is where things start getting dicey. In 1992, we had the first addressing crisis. IPv4 addresses are getting scarce. The big problem, that was the one that everyone could understand. The big problem that had everyone scared was that router table size was expanding exponentially. Now, for some crazy reason, which I still do not understand, the internet was handing out IP addresses in order. They considered it a flat address space. Okay? This meant that every time you got a block of addresses, a new entry had to go in the router table.
You said that before when you said like a country might take a block or something.
Well, no, I said, so it was a company
Yeah.
in France asked for a block of addresses. They get X. Okay? Now, suppose there's a company in India that asks for a block of addresses. They get X plus 1. Right? Now, I don't know about you, but when I look at addresses on the street, I expect them to have some kind of reason to it. Right? I mean, they don't always, especially in older cities. The first time I was in London, I learned that the address numbers, well, there's evens on one side and odds on the other. The numbers across the street don't match up. You could have 70 on one side and across the street was 532.
So how would they fix it though? I mean, they would have just, they would have
Well, you
had,
just know.
they would have had to have scoped out a few sections then.
Well, I mean, they just labeled it, right? So over dinner that night, I was talking to my British friends, and I explained to them that this had thrown me for a loop for a minute, right? And they said, yeah, normal. I said, well, you don't understand where I come from. Not only if it's 123 on this side, it's 124 on that side, right? And there's some consistency. And not only that, but when I cross a block, the numbers go up by 100 in both directions. And my friend thought about that for a minute and said, that could be really useful. No kidding! But, I've come to describe this as those cities built after Descartes. And of course, Boston's like that. I mean, there are only some places where there's something akin to a grid. Actually, a friend of mine wrote a book on all of it, not the streets. You can understand the streets in Boston if you know the order of the landfills.
Is Boston built? I knew they flattened out.
Are you kidding? It's all landfill.
I knew they flattened out a lot of the mountains and they filled them with
No. It's basically most of Boston is filled.
Yeah, that was landfill. Okay. Like trash
Okay, if you
landfill?
look, to show you an idea.
No.
If you go down to Faneuil Market,
Dirt.
if you go down to Faneuil Market and you stand, there's a statue of Sam Adams in the front of Faneuil Market, right? If you stand in front of that statue and look down on the courtyard, you will see a groove about this wide snaking across the courtyard. That's the original shoreline.
Well, that's why I asked, because with Manhattan, the southern tip of Manhattan is actually a trash landfill.
No,
I know this-
there
you're
was an
not talking
island there before.
No, there was, but the southern tip of Manhattan,
The tip, yeah, the
Yeah.
tip is.
Yeah, it's
but
all
what we're sitting on right now is landfill.
I thought when you said
MGH
landfill
is
immediately, I didn't
landfill.
think land, I thought.
Southie is landfill.
It's a lot of landfill.
You're right, it is. You know, Boston was basically, find an 18th century map of Boston, you will find it much smaller. Okay, Boston was basically an island that was only connected to the land at low tide. So anyway, this was a crisis. So they took some short-term changes to moderate the issue. First, they created private address space, which we talked about last time, right? They realized that not everybody had to have a public IP address, and in fact, it was a little bit better security if they didn't do that. So they created private address space that would, lower the demand for IP addresses. We tied it pretty, we were pretty loose on handing out blocks of addresses, as I said, last time. BBN, who never had more than 5,000 employees, had 6 Class A addresses for 32 million computers each. They didn't need those, And basically, they said they would give tier 1 providers huge blocks of addresses, and when you came and asked IANA for a block of addresses, they'd say, go see your tier 1 provider. Now, this has the effect of making the addresses provider dependent. Before this, IP addresses were not addresses. They weren't location dependent. But now, by doing this, I can look at a prefix, know that is a prefix for Verizon, and I route it to Verizon and let him worry about where it is. Right? It becomes location dependent. It becomes an address. We moved to classless interdomain routing, which essentially is what the masking stuff is all about. Instead of having Class A, Class B, Class C, we can now put the boundary anywhere we want.
That's for subnets.
Yeah, that's subnet. And then we said we need to recommend a replacement for IPv4, because we could clearly see we're getting beyond 32 bits in Vietnam. So finding a replacement, the IAB, the Internet Architecture Board, convened the road process. They ended up recommending as a replacement CLMP as IPv7. Basically, it's IP with variable length addresses and aggregatable addresses. It names the node, it fixes the multi-homing problem, and it would reduce router table size by a factor of 4 or 5. The IETF goes berserk. And I mean berserk. A friend of mine was chair of the IAB at the time. He was getting 70 nasty emails an hour, 24 hours a day for weeks. How he survived, I have no clue. No OSI, no way, no how. Model, we don't need no stinky model. We got rough consensus and running code. So they convened an IPNG process. The rules were a fixed length address, which they've now admitted was a mistake because the guys who were yelling and screaming didn't understand scatter-gather hardware, and that doing a variable length address was no harder than doing fixed length. Continue to name the interface. I couldn't believe they were doing this. At this point, the multi-homing problem is 20 years old. We've known the answer for 20 years, and they're still not going to fix it. At least 20 bytes of address, an open standard, voila, IPv6. Or anything but CLMP. There are still people, in fact, fairly well-known people, advocating, pointing out that this was a major mistake. In fact, there are debates going on as we speak because they can't figure out how to make IPv6 work the way they want. Okay, I've been watching them just daily lately. Still no solution to multi-homing. The problem is now 20 years old, no large reduction in router cable size. All is not well. About 9 months after IPv6 was approved, the light dawns. We name the interface, but root aggregation is a must. We actually have to have it to make this stuff viable. That implies provider-based addressing, means if you change providers, you gotta renumber your network. Kind of shot yourself in the foot on that one, didn't you? Transition to V6 is a dual stack with a NAT. So once behind a NAT, what do I need with IPv6? How many feet do you guys have? Finally, around 2000, somebody says, okay, we really need to deal with this multi-homing problem. Given the negative reaction to naming the node, we need a workaround. The problem is that we've been overloading the semantics of the address with locator information and identifier information. We need to split the two. I hate to tell you this, guys. A friend of mine wrote this paper. I hate to tell you, but you can't locate something without identifying it, and you can't identify it without locating it. All identifiers in computer science are locators, and vice versa. You know. In fact, Salzer, in his operating system paper on naming and addressing, defines that resolving a name is to locate an object in a particular context given its name. So even he recognized that this was a false distinction. But, you know, they went with it.
What does this mean, the name problem you're referring to, of resolving the name?
Well, they're trying to find a solution to the multi-homing problem.
The multi-homing problem
Is the fact that we're naming the interface and we can't tell if those two wires go to the same place.
okay.
Okay? The only solution is to route to the node.
Yeah.
Okay? But the thing I sort of left out there, but I thought you implied it. The IPNG process was one of the most nasty, terrible, mean-spirited discussions anybody's ever been in. It was awful. And as somebody said to me not too long ago, some of the people involved were psychologically scarred by it. So when it came time to solve the multi-homing problem, they were looking for anything but proposing to name route to the node address. The trouble is, there is no other solution.
Name, am I the only one who's not sure what this means?
Okay.
I don't want to take.
No, this is important. Here's a host. Remember we had routers and we were naming, you know, this was 23 and this was 5,
Yeah.
right? Those are the two addresses we have for this guy,
Oh, I see.
right? We shouldn't, these are routing to here
Yeah.
and calling it the end of the path. This is routing to here and calling it the end of the path. The end of the path is here.
Right.
Okay? We need a number here. And the end of the path is to route to 12. If I can route to 12, then I can receive over either of these.
Okay.
Because, you know, these are on the path to 12.
Okay.
This is not on the path to 23 or on the path to 5. Okay?
Okay.
There is no other workaround. There is no other solution.
Right.
Okay?
And is 12 the IP address in this case?
It could be.
Well, right. I mean,
It could be the CLP address, right? The IP address is 23 and 5. That's what I was saying about the example of the IP. IP is a point of attachment address, it's not a node address. Okay?
So, for example, if I put the third element card and use it to another, for example, another device or network card, and attach to another element.
Yeah?
So will it work, right?
If this is the address of the host, yeah. See, the thing is, you need, okay, the IP address and the MAC address are naming the same thing.
Okay.
That's the problem. Okay? You know, naming this interface is the same as naming this. And in the layers, that's what that means. If I have, layers, physical, data link, I've got a MAC address in here, and then the interface here is the IP address. In fact, if you look at that picture that I just had, this is the IP address, right?
Yeah.
Okay, is that? Well, this and that are the same thing. Right, I want an address here, okay? And now I can map this to either to an IP address on this interface or an IP address on this interface.
Okay.
Okay? The trouble is, there's not much interest in IPv6. The thing is, these guys were so scared. The other thing I can point out here is that when this fight was over, people were so upset that they did, the A team walked off and did other things. IPv6 was developed by the B team.
What was the B team? What
Same
was
as-
the A team? What was,
When this thing broke, I put this question to the guys who were involved. There were probably less than 24 people in the IETF who understood the issue.
how many people were working on this? Just out of curiosity. It seems like a pretty,
500, 1,000.
so fewer people than worked on like the, I don't know, the instrument modules, the Saturn V.
No, there are a lot of little sub-problems in the instrument module with Saturn V. This was all one debate on just this issue. Okay, actually, I would say probably 3,000 or 4,000 people ended up commenting on this.
Okay.
70 nasty emails.
I was gonna say, the same guy is sending, like, auto-sending 20 emails a day.
Well,
Trying to
there
get
was a
those
lot of
numbers
that too. Not the same email.
I know,
There
we're
was
talking
a lot
about
of-
this.
You want to talk about a flame war? This was a really big flame war. Okay. The trouble was they had so little understanding. They were afraid to do anything really major, and so they tried to keep the changes as minimal as possible. Okay. So the problem was, as I said last time, what they ended up with was a protocol that had no benefit to anybody who had to pay for adopting it. So why were you going to adopt it? For the next decade, there's hype. It's better security, better quality of service, better mobility. Actually, it was none of those. The rules were anything that worked with V6 had to work with V4, in case they had to back it out.
So it was really just to fix everybody else's problem, not for some company. What did the company care, right?
Yeah.
It didn't do.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly, you can go to your board meeting and say, well, we should adopt IPv6, it's gonna cost us X million dollars. And what do we get for it? Well, we become better network citizens. Oh yeah, that's gonna sell, right? No, you're not gonna get anything for it. And the only thing, in fact, the group that was in charge of it thought the only thing they had to do was make the address size bigger. They didn't understand the router table size, the router table problem at all. And as Mike Odell said, it's a dessert topping and a floor wax. IPv6, and then Jeff, as late as 2008, Jeff Houston was saying IPv6 has all the benefit of a minor technology change with all the disruption of a major forklift upgrade. And he's a supporter. By 2000, we're aware that the architecture is running out of steam. Houston, we've got a problem. October 2006, major presentation of the IPG, the pre-meeting before the ITF. Router table size is on the increase again due to multi-homing. It's either combinatorial or exponential, we can't tell which. Who cares? At that rate. Moore's Law won't bail us out this time. This is a big time crisis. We're in big trouble. 2008, we're 15 years or more beyond IPv6, and they still don't know how it's going to work. If not fixed, it's the end of the internet as we know it. The net will fragment, cost in the core will skyrocket. Network World is covering IETF meetings like a blanket, but they never bring up this topic.
What's network work? It's the whole thing.
A journal, a rag. The industry journal, right? Tons of papers written on it. Finally, Cisco and others start proposing solutions, mostly requiring patches involving NATs and a bevy of new protocols. Makes everybody nervous, but what else are you supposed to do? But we do mode home. Well, not really. We include. Because we route on the interface, this forces route aggregation based on to be provider-based. Addresses with common prefixes go to the same provider. Then we can store a single route to the provider rather than a route for every provider.
I have a question for this. This is early 2000s.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, I'm not this specific,
Yeah,
but I'm
right.
saying this problem is still being addressed in the early 2000s,
Yeah.
and this is supposedly a sky is falling apocalyptic thing.
Yeah.
The internet has already gone through its bubble, and it's now completely monetized, and all these billions and billions of dollars going into space. Why isn't anyone saying this is something that we should reinforce this infrastructure? Much in the same way that they're saying, like, hey, it benefits us to invest billions and billions of dollars to get everyone in the world online, because the more people are online, the more money we can make.
Well, they're trying to do that.
So they're failing pretty spectacular. But no one wants to invest in this. No one wants to.
Well, no, they're investing billions.
Where
They're
is it
investing
going?
billions in IPv6.
How do you need that much?
But they don't, look, they really don't understand how this stuff works. This is the problem.
So they're throwing billions of dollars into the
You've got all these people who are experts.
I need their
and they
names and
don't
numbers.
understand.
Get me.
I got some.
Got some ideas. Don't
Within
have
the
to
last
really
six,
work.
within the last 6 months, on one of the mailing lists I'm on, there was a guy who said, gee, I've been thinking about the multi-homing problem for 30 years and I still can't figure out how to do it. The solution has been obvious in 1972. Okay, we've known how to fix it, and every other network got it right.
What's every other network? So there's the internet.
Cyclod,
Okay.
DECnet, XNS, Xerox, everybody else got it right.
But the internet's like the only truly used one, the only one that.
Well, no. Remember, they were all useful.
I didn't say useful. I'm saying it's used by everybody.
Well, but the only reason for that is because they were spending more money, orders of magnitude more money than everybody else put together. And it was chump change in the DoD budget. Nobody knew. Okay? So, and there was nobody who had enough expertise and clout to say, guys, you're screwing up. Well, in fact, the OSI guys tried, but when the CLMP thing was announced, when IPv7 was announced, there was essentially a mob reaction to it. And you just can't beat a mob. I mean, you just have to let it run its course. Okay? Now we're into it, and as I said, I'm on a mailing list right now where they're still debating, that this, they put so many patches in place that they've backed themselves into a corner and stuff isn't working. Okay? So to do multi-homing, we must assign. So the problem is the addresses are provider-based. okay? To do multi-homing, we have to have provider-independent addresses that aggregate. We don't have those, okay? The problem here is router table size. So why wasn't it fixed? Don't you think it's odd that there was a DoD network touted to survive nuclear attack that didn't support redundant links? There were good reasons. Not that many hosts needed multi-home. I've talked about that one before in my response to it. Not everyone should bear the cost for a few. Now, this one I love because this is a classic standards gambit, right? Propose a condition that makes the solution asymmetrical and ugly. And of course, presumes that there is a high cost to doing this, when in fact, there's no cost at all. Multi-homing will be to different providers, so there's no point, which the assumption's wrong. The idea here is that if you have to multi-home to a different provider, by the time you can reroute the packets, it'll be too late, or else the TTL will have exhausted and you'll discard it anyway. First of all, a lot of multi-homing is done within the same provider, and it assumes that peering points would have the same granularity they did in the 80s, which is just not true. We tried to fix this, but it was rejected. By this time, everything's getting kind of crazy. They decided to try and go with the Cisco solution of Local ID Split Protocol, or LISP. And then they used the best of them. This is a crisis. We got to solve it. So we got to do something. And so they stampeded everybody to it. November 2008. Just when we have a bigger problem. A guy at Cisco calls me up and says, "I got this architecture problem I want to talk to you about." I said, "Okay." He says he's come across two problems in implementing the Local ID Split Protocol. Both require doing path discovery. Path discovery doesn't scale. LISP won't scale. This thing is a failure. The only thing they've got on the block. He expects that any local ID approach will have the same problem. We just went to DEF CON 1. Okay? And he's sort of plaintively going, why hasn't anybody noticed this? Because they didn't want to. So it turns out he's right. All proposals based on local ID split have the same flaw. Once we put it in terms of the IPC model, the solution is obvious. So let's take a look at it very carefully. What do the locator and the identifier name? Well, the locator, we're going to continue to name the interface. The locator is here. The identifier, now, they said it had to be a flat identifier. And they always describe it in terms of endpoints. So they said, well, it's this thing here. Okay? The locator locates the wrong thing. This is locating a point on the path, not the end of the path. Same thing we saw over there, right? Now, what's really interesting thing is the identifier was supposed to be a flat identifier. And they convened this routing research group in the IRTF, and they were debating it, and they realized that they were going to have to be able to map from this to this. Because if this thing goes down and it has the same identifier, how do I find the other locator? Can't do it. Oh my gosh, right? So we got to map this to this. Well, that means that, if they're flat, then that means it's just a linear search. There's nothing you can do about it. It's going to be really expensive and really take a long time. Well, we can't do that. We must make the identifiers aggregatable. Well, wait a minute. Making them aggregatable makes them into locators. This is local protocol. Oh, well, And of course, I thought when they discovered that they'd realize that this had to be the answer. But no. They can't do that. That's got too much pain association with it. So that's when they said, oh, well, this is it. This is the endpoints with the application. These are changing frequently. They're still out there pushing this, but everyone knows it can't work. Some people say solve the problem in the host. These are for most guided souls who claim this. People who do SCTP like to say this. Oh, we solved the multi-homing problem. Yeah, they do it by changing the definition. That's one way of solving a problem, right? You change the definition of the problem.
Professor, why they want to name it? Is there a reason? Why they name it?
Why do they name what?
I mean, the hosts, devices or interfaces, why? Just why they just keep it as it is? I mean,
Because you can't do multi-homing as long as you're naming the interface. And as you'll see later, you can't, it makes mobility really, really complicated.
no, my question is, why we need to name the interface?
What else are you gonna name?
Why
Well,
we just-
remember, they started out doing this because everybody else did. The phones named the interface, terminal networks named the interface. This is datacom, so we named the interface. Tradition,
just
we
for
gotta do tradition. The internet is a craft, it's not a science. So, these guys define multi-homing as for load balancing, for sending. Okay? This ignores that it might take seconds, if not minutes, to do the failover. Remember, the fundamental problem here is the network doesn't know that two paths go to the same place. This is a problem of delivering, not sending. If you solve the delivering problem, you've solved the load balancing problem. Local ID split doesn't scale. There's no solution involving routing on the interface that scales. In other words, IP is fundamentally flawed regardless of which one you're talking about. But we saw that coming a long time ago. What's the IETF's plan B? Plan A. What are major universities working on? Plan A. What are the vendors working on? Plan A. Still? They say, well, there may be some scaling problem in local ID split, but we recommend using it since they're very unlikely to ever be a problem. You mean unlikely, like nobody's going to default on their home mortgages? Kind of unlikely? A black swan? You know where that went. Don't worry, it won't happen very often, only in a crisis. And of course, Vince Fuller said in the original presentation that when you notice that this has happened, we're already over the cliff. This must be a really hard problem. Well, not really. It'll work. Consider the following network. Since we want to emphasize that we're naming interfaces, let's give the addresses to each of the interfaces. Here we go. Now, let's say that A wants to send a PDU to H. So it goes to DNS, looks up the address, and gets back 9. Now, these guys have been running a routing algorithm, and the route is ABDFH. So what do the router tables look like? They look like this. So what happens? A consults its forwarding table and sends it on outgoing address 1 to next hop 22. B consults its forwarding table and sends it on outgoing address 7 to next hop 15. D consults its forwarding table and sends it on outgoing address 14 to next hop 20, and so on. Now, another TU is sent from A to address 9, but just after it leaves, the interface goes down. 9 goes down. Okay? So what happens if the link with address 9 goes down? Well, in a few tens of milliseconds, the routing update is done. Address 9 and 11 are eliminated from the route forwarding table. After several seconds and many retries, A determines that address 9 is not responding. All TCP connections with address 9 are terminated. All packets en route 9 are lost. Hopefully there's a second DNS entry that lists H as an address, and also address 10. Connections are reestablished using address 10 and several seconds of elapsed. Now, suppose we name the nodes. Well, since we're going to name the nodes, we've already got labels on, let's just use those. And we're only doing point-to-point links here, so we don't have to worry about that. But we do have to worry about, distinguishing local interfaces between, which wires are coming out of which nodes. So let's do that. Let's assign identifiers to them. There we go. We got the same path. What do the router tables look like? They look like this. Notice something? They're a lot shorter. Sending a PDU from A to H. Now, well, it's not a mistake, but I made something a little confusing. Basically, I was so intent on making sure that the numbers at the two ends of the wires were different, I forgot to realize that they were actually going to be sitting in the same interface on the other end each time. Not a big deal, but it would be nice if there was something more different. Okay, so now, what happens if just after the PDU is sent, the link from F to H fails? In a few tens of milliseconds, a routing update is done, a new routing table is generated, the PDU gets to D after the routing update is concluded, and is delivered to H as if nothing happened. Bingo. And basically what we see here is this is simple, it just works, it's part of the structure of the problem. One of the excuses for not solving this a long time ago was only if it only needed, so the burden should not be on everybody. Burden? There's no burden here. There's nothing extra needed. In fact, there's less stuff needed. The routing tables are smaller. Not only is it free, but it's less expensive. Notice how much smaller the router tables are. Failover can be reduced by orders of magnitude. To be generous, this shows how tradition trumps science and the internet. To be less generous, in their rush to not do anything OSI did, they cut off their noses to spite their face. Suppose that points of attachment interfaces fail frequently. Is that a problem? No, we call that mobility. Yeah.
In one sentence, what is the worst case scenario for all this stuff? This apocalyptic thing. I am still kind of confused as to what the problem is. Like I understand that, but I'm just saying like I don't have redundancy in my phone, so why would I care?
You don't, but what about the data centers? You know, I mean.
So worst case scenario, data centers around the world are going down.
Well, actually, and you do care, okay? Because your phone is not singly connected. As soon as you walk into a Wi-Fi hotspot, your phone is logging into it as well. Okay? In fact, that's one of the things they want to be able to. One of the problems with this is the systems have not been written carefully. Okay? So when you come up, for example, even the Mac OS thinks that Bluetooth is only for mice or other things that it knows about for Bluetooth. It doesn't treat it as just a pipe.
So worst case scenario, I don't get any data to my phone.
Right. Okay. Now, but the same thing holds for data centers.
Yeah, so anything's important. This
Well,
is
let's put it
me.
this way. After 9/11,
Yeah.
everybody, all the brokerage houses were multi-home.
I know all this. They shut the one thing down. They said we have to make sure, or we have to make sure that we have redundancy and there's redundancy at the same
The
minute.
New York Stock Exchange was also multi-home.
Yeah.
The difference was the New York Stock Exchange had made Verizon show them where the cable runs were. The brokerage houses didn't. All their multi-home cables they were paying for went through the same central office as base as Twin Towers.
Yeah.
The day after 9/11, the New York Stock Exchange was online. The brokerage houses weren't. The exchange was shut down for a week until they could get them up and running. That's what the difference is.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay? Okay. Anyway, it's just good design, right? It's simpler, you know? Want to hear the real picture? We had this right in 1992. We knew the answer since 1972. It was rejected by the IETF. To add insult to injury, CLNP was deployed and operational in the routers in 1992. And in fact, there was more CLNP deployed in 1992 than IPv6 in 2014.
What's the difference in device numbers from 92 to 2014?
No, in terms of number of devices,
Yeah.
there was more CLNP out there than that than there was devices using IPv6 in 2014.
And I'm asking how many, what was the device difference, the number of device difference?
Who knows?
Like
A million.
billion? Okay.
Yeah, but I mean,
Wow.
the transition was essentially over in '92. Because the IETF rejected doing it right. We've had a, 30-year hiatus? And we're having problems with the answer. Yeah, you just can't make stuff like this up. The problem was never separating locator from identifier. It was separating logical location from physical location. It's impossible to locate something without identifying it. This pseudo problem arises from not having a complete addressing architecture, from not being precise in your terms, but we'll let Odell have the last word. When all you got's a hammer, everything looks like your thumb. You know, that basically, they didn't do this right because of post-IPNG trauma. Okay? And of course, we got that whole IPv. Here's all the problems with IPv6 that we talked about last week. So I think we're done for the, okay. So most of the problems in the internet today are scaling, multi-home mobility, distributed applications are rooted in not having a complete addressing. Unlike an OS, there's no indirection in its addressing architecture. Imagine trying to relocate code without virtual addresses. More identifiers without decoupling namespaces solves nothing. Loc ID split was just post-IPNG trauma. And now Mrs. McCabe wishes she'd fix that problem in the 70s. But she didn't do it, and now it's too late.
We talking about the midterm?
Project, huh?
Projects.
What?
We talking about the midterm?
Sure, what about the midterm?
What is the midterm format?
More or less like the homework. Okay, open book, open note.
You bring a calculator?
Sure.
I remember my computer.
Can you use
Sure.
mine?
Really?
Can you use mine?
Yeah, but if I catch you on the net, it's an automatic zero.
I don't care with the net. I have a lot of notes that I need to use
Oh.
Command F,
Yeah,
and that is a big,
no,
big
that's
thing
the
for me.
same as being open note.
Okay,
open
sweet,
note.
sweet.
Yeah. No, and people have e-readers, I mean, you know,
I just want Command F. I don't want anything else.
that's all right, that's fine. You know, in fact, you know, I actually, you know, I say, you know, I can't remember all this stuff. You know, I don't expect you to. I expect you to understand how it works.
I
You
just
know,
need
there aren't
Command
that many principles here, really, when you come down to it. I mean, actually, what we've got here more than anything else is how to violate the principles. Right? You know, it is, you know, complexity, you know, coming out of doing it wrong.
In terms of the project, we said we were gonna do that after lecture 4 and syllabus. What, I saw some of the things in syllabus in terms of the page count and things of that nature, but is there like a rubric that we should go to?
No, I have no blueprint for this.
Okay.
Okay, first of all, there's a wide variety of things here, okay? And they would have very different structures if you delve into it. I prefer you don't do security a lot because we have courses on security you're probably going to take, right? So, you know, I mean, just, you know, in that sense, you know, it's just, you know, concentrate on something that's here. Yeah, concentrate.
The midterm is going to be problems, also theory.
I'm sorry.
The midterm.
Will be what?
Is it just going to be problems
Yeah.
or also theory?
Or also what?
Theory.
Theory?
Yeah.
Is there a distinction?
It's more like calculating the.
They're going to, the problems will require you to think.
And as far as the presentation at the end of the projects, is there a format or a length?
Oh, okay. We have a large class. We're going to do 2 nights. I don't want you, you'll only have about 10 minutes.
Gotcha. So we turn it all in at the same time, then you decide to.
Well, no. Yeah. We'll probably get them all in. But here's what I want, okay? You're going to write a paper that'll introduce the problem and all that kind of good stuff that papers always do. Okay? We're in a networking course. We all know this stuff by then. right? So what I want you to do is come in and give the highlights,
Gotcha.
right? What did you find that was unique, that was out of the ordinary, that was something to remember? Okay? And, or to discuss, okay? So, that you can do in 5 or 10 minutes. And that's all, okay?
Okay, doke.
Can I choose VLAN?
Sure. Although, well, you can use VLAN, and that one I would say yes, because there's a lot in VLAN besides what we just covered.
What is the midterm up to, the network layer?
The network layer, the last lecture before this one.
And is there anything else we should know? Just review material?
Review material, know where to look things up, understand how it works, okay? So that when you ask, a question that sort of digs into it,
Yeah.
okay? And, actually, if you guys have got some time, there's a second lecture here which we're not getting to, but there's a piece of this at the end of it that would be really helpful here. Let me just quickly go over it.
And Professor, there is a,
What, midterm?
documents are different.
Yeah, it would help your thinking, I think. Hang on.
Blackboard and your presentation is different.
Not really.
There is like a page difference. You have a,
Oh, not significant. If they're real different, I'll upload a new one.
thank you.
Let's see here. Here we go. At the end of the lecture we didn't get to tonight, I didn't really expect us to. We really had lots of great questions and stuff. Oh, come on. Trying to get me. Okay, this stuff should be of some use. Now, this is a primer on identifiers and protocols. In a properly formed layer, these are the identifiers one should have. Okay, port IDs, connection ID is formed by concatenating source and destination connection endpoint identifiers, and they're carried in protocol. Port IDs are the only common identifier shared across the layer boundary. Okay, this is the isolation. If the layer has more than 3 members and relays, or is directly over a multi-access media, then addresses are required. If the layer can be moved, can have more than one flow at the same time, then port IDs and connection endpoint IDs are required. Most addressing problems can be traced to not following these rules. In the internet, the configuration is a bit different. The connection ID is created by concatenating source and destination port IDs. There are no connection endpoint IDs. The port IDs double as connection endpoint IDs and are carried in protocol. This is a problem for security. In the internet and OSI, some layers lack even port IDs. Colloquially, they'll have a protocol ID field that identifies the protocol in the layer above. There is one value assigned to each protocol that might occur. Okay? Therefore, you can't do this. You can have 2 TCPs above and use the protocol ID field to distinguish. At best, it may identify the syntax of the protocol in the layer above. To distinguish flow between 2 addresses requires another field, often called the type of service and flow label. In the IEEE 802, we find another identifier being used as the layer name 802.1 calls to the plan ID, 802.11 calls to the BSSID and some MAC address. This complement of identifiers is all that is required to provide better security, you know. And so, you know, there's some stuff there at the end, and there's some more stuff that is essentially the fundamental principles here that we may want to know. So anyway, we can go with that. Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
How's Paris, by the way?
Huh?
How's Paris?